Thank you for joining us. This recording was captured live at the 2026 NRB conference. While there may be a few moments where the audio isn't perfect, we're excited to share these great insights and discussions with you.
All right, folks, we're here again at NRB 2026 in Nashville, and look who is on our set. David Barton and Tim Barton. David, the founder of Wall Builders, and Tim, his son, is just amazing, and the president now, right,
Yes.
of Wall Builders. Awesome. And guys, I'm so thankful that you came over and we can have this time together. Why don't you bring us up to speed? What's going on with Wall Builders? And you're always up to something amazing.
Well, since I have the microphone we're sharing, I'm going to
Yes.
start.
Okay.
So God has given a lot of really cool opportunities this year with the 250th coming up. There's things we're doing with the White House, with the Faith Office, with the National Faith Advisory Board, with lots of different departments. So God has definitely opened some doors. What's really fun and refreshing is how many people are interested, not just in celebrating America, although that's certainly refreshing on some level. Of course, we know there's going to be a countercultural push of, why we should cancel America, but it gives the opportunity to have a conversation and say, no, here's why America was the greatest force for good. Here's the things that really made us different and unique that really should be celebrated and hopefully replicated going forward. So God's opened a lot of really cool doors. I think one of the really fun things, though, is there's a lot of things happening in the legislative and the educational fronts as well.
Yeah, tell us.
A lot of states right now are in legislative session, and there's been a lot of pieces of legislation that we have been advocating and working for. You've been, I think, most of our conferences the last several years, so you've heard and seen and been a part of some of those conversations. There are, last year, I believe it was 8 states that had done things to advance the 10 Commandments. This year, there's another dozen plus states that are adding on, doing 10 Commandments things, continuing to expand this last year in Texas. We did legislation to legalize school prayer and Bible back in public schools.
In Texas?
In Texas.
Yeah.
But those are things that
Did they
other
pass?
states, it did pass, and the governor signed it.
Okay,
So that is back in Texas.
All right.
Part of the law says that it is now legal, but every school board has to approve it. And the reason also that they did it this way was that way every school board goes on record. So you know what school boards are in favor and who's against, because that also helps us as believers to know who in our region, right? Who in my district maybe is on our page and not on our page. So it does give some exposure maybe for who Christians should pay attention to,
for sure.
who we should vote for or not
school
vote
board
for.
Elections,
But Dad, you also have been given another pretty special opportunity that you are helping do some very unique things in Texas, and you've done this in lots of states, but something in Texas is happening that could be very impactful to the rest of the nation.
Yeah, what happens is every state, every few years, revises their standards for all their courses.
Yes.
So all their curriculum, whether it's math, whether it's science, anything else. And there's, right now, Texas is saying it's time for us to look at our history and see if we need to revise that. Okay. So what's happened, I've been doing this in various states for a number of years, and so I was appointed as one of 9 people in Texas to do the history standards in Texas. That's about 22, 23 courses, somewhere in there. We've got about 6 million kids in Texas, and Texas and California have always been the 2 states that drive the textbooks.
Okay.
Because, Scott Forsman or Pearsall, all these big publishers, when they publish, they want to get their money back. It takes them hundreds of millions to create curriculum for whatever. And so what they generally do is they take the standards that we come out with in Texas. That's good, because ours tend to be history-based, conservative, not woke. But then they also take Californians.
Yeah.
And so California and Texas, we're 24% of the nation's public school kids.
Wow.
And so if they can publish a textbook that meets both of those states, but then you don't get any good history, because the woke stuff wipes out the good stuff. So Texas now has decided to become its own publishing company.
Okay.
So this time when we do our books and our standards, it will be totally, we don't care what anybody else does, here's what we're going to do. Now, as a result, we're having all these other states come to Texas and say, we want your books.
Wow.
For example, in Texas, we do believe that things work and that things don't work, and you should know which it is. So we require in state law, in our textbooks, that you teach about communism. That's a complete failure. It's never worked in the history of
Yes,
mankind.
very good.
Here's the oppression it brings. Here's what socialism brings.
Yeah.
Instead of saying these are options, we say, no, these are,
They're terrible
we're
options.
putting value
Yeah.
judgments on them because they've never worked.
Yeah.
And in the same way now, we're required that in all courses we have Bible selections and Bible excerpts as part of the courses, and they go through. There is now a full credit course on the Old Testament, full credit course on the New Testament. So Old Testament survey, New Testament survey, you get in public schools
They're
now.
teaching the Bible in school.
Teaching the Bible in
Okay.
schools, and that's part of history because
Yeah.
this is the way it has been. And there are laws requiring you have to teach founding documents. You have to teach Washington's farewell address. You have to teach Federalist Papers 51 and
Very good,
number 10.
yes.
You have to read the documents. And so we in Texas have passed so many good laws that get back to the history that worked for 200 years. And this time it's actually going to have an impact because in Texas we'll start publishing our own textbooks. And what we're doing as content advisors, 9 of us, the textbooks have to match 100% what we come up to.
Wow.
So they can't just say, well, we don't really agree with that. No, we're appointed as part of state process to do this. And so it's really good. And we've already had a bunch of states come to us, Tennessee and Arkansas. We want your textbooks. Great.
Yeah.
So now we're going to have some strong textbooks back in the public school market
Yeah.
that haven't been out there for generations.
That's amazing. So, on the whole subject of education, you guys at Wall Builders, you've got so much material on this, but the idea of separation of church and state, I think it's had its biggest impact probably in our schools, where we take prayer out, we take 10 Commandments out, we take creationism out. We can't even tell the kids that your rights come from your Creator, which is in our Declaration of Independence. So we're like national schizophrenia here.
Yeah.
Are you seeing things turn around though? Are we beginning to make some progress? You're talking about the states there. Do you see a day, maybe not in the too distant future, where we can actually have some of those cases overturned and prayer back in our schools?
I would say that we've already had most of those cases overturned, just people aren't aware of it.
Okay.
And so if you go in the last 6 years of the Supreme Court, there's been 3 major decisions. And essentially the bottom line is they've said, we got it wrong 5,000 times over the last 60 years.
Yeah.
And what's called the limit test, 1971, they said that was bad. Well, there was 5,000 cases that have been decided on that were hostile to religion.
Yeah.
That removed it. And the court has now said that's bad. That's bad. I hate saying law because it's not law. That's bad judicial law. And so those are out. So as a result now, that's why 22 states, as Tim mentioned, have reintroduced the 10 Commandments back in. The court has taken the new position that if something is historical and traditional, the court's going to assume that it's constitutional.
Wow.
And so you can show the 10 Commandments in the very first textbook published in America, 1690. 10 Commandments were there. We've had it since 1690. That's historical, traditional, so all these states are starting to put it back in. You can do that with school prayer. You can do that with creation, because the Founding Fathers, Daniel Webster, Founding Father, his senior paper at Dartmouth in 1801 was on the creation-evolution debate. So that's not a new debate. At the
1801.
time,
That's before Darwin.
people think Darwin did it. All Darwin did was take 2,500 years of evolutionary teaching and made it really simple. And he did simplify it. But at the time, 500 years BC with Aristotle, they're already debating the primordial slime, the Big Bang, and the intermediary species.
Yeah.
That didn't come from Darwin.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was 2,500 years ago. So Darwin just made it simple. And so we can show that, hey, teaching creation evolution, that's been going on hundreds of years in America. It's okay to get back into the classrooms.
Wow.
So it has changed. The trick is our legislators go, whoa. I'm not sure about that because we haven't been able to do this in 60 years. No, the court's been really clear. And so we are winning those cases. The problem is sometimes people don't have the courage to try it because I don't think we can win it. No,
Yeah.
you can win this.
Wow.
And so that's what we're seeing with states.
So there's a case that came up out of Oklahoma last year to the Supreme Court, and there was Oklahoma's charter school system. There was a purely Catholic school that wanted to be a charter school, but they were going to teach, raise the kids in Catholicism. And the court refused to hear the case. They didn't say it was unconstitutional, but they said, no, we're not going to do it. Did that give any concern about whether they're backing off a little bit on this, or?
I'll answer that too.
Yeah.
In this way, that was an Oklahoma court, not federal. And so Oklahoma courts have been they're kind of like Kansas courts. Kansas is a very conservative state, except their court.
Yeah,
Their court's extremely liberal. And Oklahoma is a very conservative state, except their court.
Yeah.
And these states that do not have elected judges,
Yeah.
they've got these appointed judges, what's called the Missouri Plan or the Modified Missouri Plan, or there's versions of that where an elite board of attorneys picks the justices for the Supreme Court, and all you can do is have retention elections. Those states are killing us.
Yeah.
And that's where Oklahoma was.
They're
killing themselves.
True.
They're killing themselves because the legislature and the people want to go in a direction, and the courts are saying, no, we don't think you should.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Do you want to say?
I do want to add something to that. So one of the things too that's important, but it's worth having the conversation so everybody else knows.
Yes.
It's not unusual for the Supreme Court to not pick up cases that we would go, but this is such an important case, if they don't think they have the votes to win it, or if some of the extenuating circumstances would change some of the fact conversation, that what ends up winning or losing is not what we were trying to win or lose.
That's right.
So I'm not disheartened by this at all. Now, that's your point. Really, it was more of a state Supreme Court of Oklahoma issue than a federal issue where that legal challenge kind of was going. But when we're looking at what's happening with the restoration of some biblical values and foundation in education, even the Ten Commandments laws, right?
Yeah.
That's being challenged in every state that's done it, basically, because the ACLU is like, you can't have religion, but all of their arguments are based on things like the 1971 Lemon v. Kurtzman decision, which was overturned in the 2022 Kennedy decision. And that's why in Louisiana, just a couple weeks ago, when at the appellate court, the appellate judges were hearing the case dealing with the Ten Commandments, Louisiana, Texas, they enjoined theirs together. And the judge was asking the whole time the ACLU attorney, doesn't all your arguments, isn't it all void because of the Kennedy decision?
Yeah.
They're like, well, Your Honor, we don't think that's relevant here. And the judges are like, you've totally misread the law.
Because we don't like the conclusion.
Yeah, right.
But the reason it matters is because just because something is legally challenged doesn't mean it's wrong, illegal, or unconstitutional. But also, just because the Supreme Court might not take it up,
That's right.
doesn't mean that they might not take up something very similar in the future. Because also, the big court, generally speaking, there's 50 states. And sometimes there are other states that are having very similar issues, and they might go, you know what, there's a better fact pattern in this state over here, but it's got to work its way up. Let's let that one play out. We're not going to take this one. I'm going to wait for that one. And it might be 2 years for that, but I'm going to wait 2 years and take that one because that's a better fact pattern. And then when that case is decided, it's going to do better for all the people in the United States of America as opposed to this. So I'm not discouraged, again, backing up to them not taking it, but it's because we know the inside baseball conversation of, the nerd, and you're like, wait a second, you just had this amazing batter come up and they laid down a bunt. What are they doing? There's a different strategy. It doesn't mean, right, that there's not something intentionally being done and that we should be concerned with it. It might be they're thinking on a different level than we are, and that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah. So
let me add to that one other thought as well, because we're seeing this play out with Trump as president.
Yeah.
Virtually everything he's done, every executive order has been challenged in court.
Yes.
And it's like, wait a minute, aren't there three branches? Doesn't the president have a right to? And no, the courts have to tell you what you can do.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is at the lower court level, he's losing 90% of the cases.
Yeah.
And that's because of what we call forum shopping. That,
it's because of Obama judges. That's what it's called.
Well, but they form chop to the Obama
That's
judge,
right? They will go find a judge that they know agrees with them that'll give them really. But what's happening is these get appealed to higher levels. Trump is winning 90% of them.
Yeah.
But what it does is it's slowing down what he wants to do 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 months.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing at the state level. You're going to get these lower level, everything has to start in lower level court, and that's where you're going to get the worst decisions.
Yeah.
And as it works its way up, the decisions get better and better. And that's what we're seeing with religious stuff, with moral stuff, with all this other stuff. And I think that's part of what you saw in Oklahoma. As Tim pointed out, look, there's already a bunch of cases coming with better fact patterns, and the courts want those.
Well, let's shift gears to the 250th. We're here. It's amazing. 250 years. Dave, you've spent your life, you've raised your family, and your whole family is devoted to rebuilding the understanding of America's Christian heritage. And I'm just like, I want to know what is it like for you right now in this time to look at the things that are happening in our country, the positive, the renewal, the rebirth, and then to be here alive, sort of at the climax of your life's work, and know that we're going to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States? And is it a great time to be alive?
My answer to that is yes and no.
Okay.
If Obama was the president right now, we wouldn't be celebrating the 250th in the way we're doing.
Yeah.
There's no question in my
Right.
mind. We would be celebrating all of our flaws, all of our
Yes.
everything we did wrong. I am thrilled with the way that we're celebrating it now because it is so positive.
Uh-huh.
We have a president who likes America and actually thinks our history matters, instead of having a woke version of pick and choose kind of stuff that we've seen for so many years at the university level. So at this point in time, and I will tell you, with President just 2 weeks ago saying, hey, National Day of Prayer, we're going to have this big, huge, massive gathering on the National Mall.
Yes.
Let's all come and pray together. And then with him issuing proclamations for prayer. And I mean, he's taking this back to what George Washington intended, that religion and morality was the basis of political prosperity.
Yeah. Wow.
And Trump has done that in a way. We've had several meetings at the White House, and they want to focus on God's hand in America for 250 years.
Wow, God's providence.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's so many things they could have chosen, and they keep saying, we want God to be center of this.
So the website for this event, it's on May 17th at the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and it's called Restoration, and then it says a National Jubilee of Prayer and Praise. And it blew my mind when I saw that, because at last year's Truth and Liberty Conference, I talked about how, this is the 5th Jubilee for the United States of America. Now, we don't celebrate it as such because we're not observant of the Old Testament ceremonial laws, but this is a time of restoration. That's what happens in the Bible in a Jubilee, is everyone gets their inheritance back. Is God restoring the inheritance, if you will, the original vision and purpose of America?
I think by His grace that is happening.
No question. It's not
and this is one of the things, for sure. I mean, God, it's funny, sometimes we read the Old Testament and we're like, those Israelites are so dumb. But if we looked at America, we'd be like, we are so dumb, right?
Yeah,
because God did so many miracles in so many moments of American history, but just like the Israelites, we read the Bible and we're like, how did they forget who God was? Like, God just did this for you. But I think if we were more self-aware, we would go, that's exactly what we've done in America.
Yes.
We haven't told the story. We haven't built enough stone monuments that kids are like, why is that there? And you're like, I'm so glad you asked.
Yes.
Here's what God did.
That's good.
And there's levels of irony, because there actually have been monuments built, but like in the BLM riots, we said, let's tear them all down. So instead of asking why are they there and learning lessons we should have been learning, we've removed them. Not to digress on that, it is absolutely by God's grace, goodness, and mercy that He is once again pouring Himself out in America. We absolutely believe that we're in the middle of a third Great Awakening. We've talked about this many times over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think anybody that was questioning, go back and watch the Charlie Kirk Memorial.
Yes.
Right? When there's never been a bigger church service in America, live streamed by 100 million people, estimates are. More than 1 billion people have watched it, and actually there's a little bit of debate of how much over 1 billion, like is it 1.5, 1.7? Like, it's an astronomical number of people that have watched it, where not only does it start off with several hours of worship. One of the things, Chris Tomlin, who was one of the worship leaders, his song Holy Forever, great song, but it talked about that all thrones and dominions, all powers are yours. And as he's singing this, he said, I was looking around, and the president and the vice president and the cabinet and senators, and he's like, I was literally going, God, like that. This is literally what this song is about.
Right.
It is all yours. And then when you have the Trump cabinet get up,
Yeah.
and virtually every single one of them,
they preach the gospel.
Yes.
I mean, literally,
Yeah.
virtually every single one gets up and talks about Jesus. Marco Rubio explaining the gospel. J.D.
Incredible.
Vance saying, man, I've never talked about Jesus more until the last 2 weeks. And the point is, God is on the move in very unique and special ways. And so I think this idea, are we in a year of Jubilee? Is God restoring? I think He is absolutely restoring. The only question in my mind is how active are we going to be in participating in what God is doing?
That's it, right.
Because
right.
ultimately, I mean, you go back, every 30, 40, 50 years, there's a major revival in American history. Like this is a normal thing God has done for America.
Yeah.
Is there's been a move, and it's just worth noting historically that some of the first times, we call them the first Great Awakening, the second Great Awakening, but you go through so many other revivals, they were revivals, God moved, people's lives were changed, but they weren't awakenings. Why? Awakenings impact the culture, and they change the trajectory of the culture. And even though you can point to guys like a D.L. Moody, a Billy Sunday, right, the Jesus revolution, the Jesus movement, those were incredibly impactful revivals. They did not change the trajectory of the nation the way the First Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening did. And it wasn't that the First and Second Great Awakening were without conflict.
No.
Because that was the most divided times in American history. And yet, and we've talked about this a lot, one of the things that's worth remembering, awakenings are not unifying times, they're clarifying times. When truth and morality is debated but ultimately promoted and elevated, and the reason we call them great awakenings is because truth and morality ultimately were restored where they had been lost.
Yeah.
And this is where, looking where we are today, the reason I say the only question for us is how much are we going to actively participate in this revival, and will it become an awakening? The awakenings, what we can point to the early pastors that were so different than a lot of the modern Christian movement, is there was such an emphasis on discipleship, whereas in the modern movement, there's such an emphasis on conversion.
Yeah.
We are huge fans of conversion. We want everybody to convert to know Jesus. The difference is Jesus didn't say go and make converts of all nations. He said go make disciples of all nations. And too many churches, they have become so seeker-friendly, not wanting to offend anybody, so they can just make some converts. Yeah. The problem is, those converts are not discipled to know how to engage culture. How do I have a godly relationship? How do I raise a godly family? How do I get involved in the marketplace in a godly manner? How do I vote in a godly manner? Because we're not discipleship, it doesn't change and impact the culture. And so what I would say is, not only is there no doubt God's on the move, the question is, how much are we going to actively participate? And the way we do that is by remembering the Great Commission of making disciples. God is doing something incredible. And if we will steward this moment well, we will be part of ushering in and living through the Third Great Awakening. Now, I think God's moving this either way. And I mean, First, Second Great Awakening, God was doing it. And I think we're already in awakening. But in the First and Second Great Awakening, there were pastors and Christians on the wrong side.
Yes.
For most of the time.
That seems to be the way it works, right? The opposition comes from the inside the church, right?
So, but this is where the question is, how will we steward this moment? Because God is clearly on the move.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about discipleship for cultural engagement, right? I mean, somebody gets saved, they come into church, I teach them, okay, salvation by grace through faith, and here's what Jesus said about prayer, and you need to join a life group, okay? Yay! Okay, but it's so much more than that, isn't it, Dave? One of the things you guys do so well, it's just blown my mind over the years, is how you show the Founding Fathers' knowledge of Scripture. Like the speech Benjamin Franklin gave at the Constitutional Convention, and you got this slide where you're saying, pulling out all these phrases from the Bible. And he's considered the least religious of the Founding Fathers, and yet he's able to quote Scripture like that, and no one even asks him for chapter or verse because they all know it too. How far do we have to go on this?
I'm going to let you answer the history stuff. I'm going to hit theology for a little bit.
Okay.
Because Jesus, two things that I think are really important. He said that I don't think, process the right way. One is in Luke 14, he says, you can't be my disciple if you don't count the cost.
Okay.
So you have to know what's involved before you make the decision. And yet we tell people, hey, say this prayer. Yes. Say the sinner's prayer with me. Did they count the cost? Do they know what they're getting into? Did they know the change in lifestyle that's going to be required? Do they know the change in behavior? No, they don't know. Oh man, we got another one saved. Really? He said you can't be my disciple if you don't count the cost. We never even told them the cost. So they've got a blank check apparently, and that's why, you can't tell me that perhaps Nancy Pelosi didn't say the sinner's prayer sometime in her life. And if she did, is she saved? Where's the fruit that goes with it? She was never discipled. You can't tell me Joe Biden might not have said the sinner's prayer sometime in his life. And if that's what we're after, is having people say the sinner's prayer, you can't say that they don't have Christian behavior and lifestyle, Christian behavior, but I mean, they professed.
Yeah.
Well, let me give one contrast. I don't disagree, but I think there's a nuance. So I would argue Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden were absolutely discipled, just not by the church.
That's right.
Right? Because the absence of the church doing their job, one of the things, like every parent, should be a no-brainer. Your kids are going to be discipled.
Yeah.
Either by social media, either by pop culture, either by the Disney Channel. Something is discipling your kids. It's just a question of who and what is discipling your kids. And if the church is negligent in discipleship, the world is happy too.
Yeah.
So I think the nuance different when we say they weren't discipled. No, they were very well discipled.
Not by the
Nancy
church.
Pelosi, right? Joe Biden, very well discipled, just not in the biblical principles by their church.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that we've missed is the Luke 14 before. And by the way, in the early church, we're told, historians tell us that the conversion process was about 3 years to become a disciple. And that's why in Acts it talks about the room of the unlearned. The room of the unlearned is kind of where you started. You don't know anything about Christianity, let us teach you about it.
Yeah.
And so you went to the room of the unlearned, and there was about a 3-year process, they tell us, in discipleship. We don't do that to any degree today.
No. We have a 3-week on Sunday morning.
Look, I can get a parakeet to say the sinner's prayer. Does that mean that parakeet is a Christian if they say the sinner's prayer? And we've used that as the measurement. The other thing that Jesus says in the Great Commission, Matthew 28, teach them everything I've taught you. Okay, so if he says, go make disciples of all men, just say converts, he say, go make disciples and teach them everything I've taught you. That's what he told his disciples. I would just take Luke 18, verses 1 through 15, 3 starting places. Jesus has a long teaching about the definition of marriage, about how many genders there are.
Matthew 19.
Matthew 19, thank you, Matthew 19. How many genders there are, and then he talks about no-fault divorce is not allowed.
Yeah.
I got a lot of white hair. I've never in my life heard a sermon on no-fault divorce.
Oh, wow.
And Jesus gave it. And he said, you go teach them everything I've taught you.
Yeah.
And by the way, when he gave it, the crowd got upset and said, whoa, Moses said we can't have a bill divorcement for any reason. He said, that's the hardness of your heart.
Yeah.
That's not what God intended.
Wow.
And so Jesus got into teaching things about the culture that we don't want to stir somebody up. And I mean, if Jesus says no-fault divorce is wrong, why are we silent on that? Well, because there's too many people that they get divorced and they would be hurt and offended. And Jesus is all the time chasing people away, not drawing them to him. He had huge crowds chase them away.
Well, we'll wrap this up by going back to education for a minute. So in the modern era, we've got the public schools, right? Compulsory public education. We send our kids out 40 hours a week. They're in the public schools. The devout Christians might have their kids in church on Sunday morning and Wednesday night.
Maybe.
And on Sunday morning, they might get, who knows what anymore. We don't even do Sunday school anymore. Right. They get a story out of the Bible in children's church, and Wednesday night it's a pump you up kind of youth type message. How are we going to compete with public schools who are indoctrinating them in secular humanism and evolution and everything else? What's the answer to this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think parents have to remember who God gave the mandate to raise the kids.
Right.
Because one of the things that is very clear in culture is how negligent parents have been. I say this in love as a parent, how negligent parents have been in the education of the kids. And it's one of the things we can point back now and recognize the challenges, but also some of the good things that came because of COVID. Most parents up to COVID, they couldn't have told you a single thing happened in the school system.
Right.
And then when kids were forced to stay at home and parents are now having to listen to some of these Zooms, they're like, wait, what did they just say? Or they listen and they're like, so do y'all not learn about this? Or that they never brought this up? Parents begin to recognize on some level, not even fully, but had a glimpse for the first time, you know what, there's some brokenness in this education system. And that led parents to go, I need to think about this. If parents don't pay attention, God called you to be the leader of this. God gave the stewardship of your kids to you, not to some government school system. And by the way, I think there's a really interesting argument to be made. When judgment happens, no public school is going to stand before God in judgment. Individuals stand before God in judgment.
Yeah.
Now, maybe some teacher is going to be held accountable for the nonsense they taught, sure. But ultimately, who bears more responsibility for what your kids learn? You or the public school teacher?
Yeah,
You do.
Yeah, for sure.
So until parents
we need a
recognize
restoration of
the authority, right?
The authority and responsibility of
Of
parents.
And then the intentionality in that, because I know some parents feel stuck, man, I couldn't afford to send my kids somewhere else. Then you need to have very intentional conversations to focus on discipleship every morning, every afternoon, every night, to give at least some level of inoculations of biblical truth, of common sense, to combat the nonsense going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, man, we're out of time for this one, but it's been awesome. Thank you for coming on Truth and Liberty.
Always good to be with
Pleasure,
you.
man.
Yeah, you're a blessing.
Appreciate all you do.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, folks, thanks for watching. See you soon.
See ya.